Welcome to this video tutorial on non-tariff measures. In this tutorial, we will define the term non-tariff measures and discuss why governments implement them. Moreover, we will go through the effects non-tariff measures have in international trade and some bilateral, regional and international initiatives addressing non-tariff measures. To begin with, let's look at two examples to understand better what non-tariff measures are. This is a regulation in the official journal of the European Union. Polyamide and melamine plastic kitchenware originating from China and Hong Kong shall be imported into the member states of the EU only if importers submit a declaration confirming that their products meet the requirements concerning the release of primary aromatic amines. Importers from China and Hong Kong can thus not enter the European market without submitting this declaration. Another example. If we go to the website of the Australian Customs and Border Protection Service, we can see the following regulation. It concerns goods that are the national cultural property of Papua New Guinea, such as objects connected with traditional cultural life. For the export of these goods, a special permission from the trustees of the Papua New Guinea Public Museum and Art Gallery is required. These two regulations affect international trade. The first one obliges exporters from Hong Kong and China to provide documentation proving compliance with the regulation protecting human security and health. The second example aims at protecting national cultural heritage. These are two examples for non-tariff measures, or NTMs, as we will call them from now on. NTMs are policy measures other than custom tariffs that can affect international trade in goods. In other words, all mandatory requirements, rules and regulations imposed by the governments of exporting, importing or transit countries are NTMs. In the next section, we will discuss why NTMs are imposed. Governments may have various reasons for implementing NTMs in addition to tariffs. NTMs might be implemented to protect humans, animals and wild fauna from the harmful substances, diseases and pests. We call these measures sanitary and phytosanitary measures. Second, NTMs can be implemented in order to protect consumers by setting out specific standards of a product, by regulating its size, shape, design, functions and performance, labeling, packaging, etc. These measures are called technical barriers to trade. Further, governments might seek to support the development of new industries through the implementation of NTMs. The technical term for this is infant industry protection. NTMs for this purpose might include taxes or levies aimed at bringing the market price of imported products in line with the prices of corresponding domestic products. Equally, governments might restrict imports for moral, political and cultural reasons. For example, an embargo of weapons or the ban on import of alcohol. Finally, import prohibitions might be in place in order to ensure the adequate supply for domestic consumers by imposing export constraints. This might be the prohibition of certain food exports when there is a shortage of national supply versus domestic demand. In the next section, we will see where NTMs are imposed. When a product is exported from country A to country B, NTMs can be imposed by the government of the exporting country in the form of mandatory quality controls, inspection requirements, export prohibitions, and many more. Custom tariffs are applied at the importing country's border in the form of a duty that must be paid to the importing country's customs authority. Equally, the importing country may impose NTMs such as import restrictions, packaging or certification requirements, etc. It may also impose measures behind the border, for example, distribution restrictions. In the next section, we will discuss how NTMs can affect international trade, developing countries, as well as companies. An UNCTAD study shows that certification and testing requirements imposed by governments has increased sevenfold between 2000 and 2009. Similarly, WTO data show that between 1995 and 2011, a total of 10,366 regular and emergency measures related to sanitary and phytosanitary measures were notified to the WTO. 1,436 notifications were made in 2010 alone. the largest in a single year. Graphically, we can reproduce how NTMs can potentially decrease trade. In our graph, the quantity traded is plotted on the horizontal axis, the price on the vertical. This is the demand function of the good. Let's assume our country totally depends on imports and the supply curve is flat. Let's also assume that there is no uncertainty about the quality of the product. This would be the initial amount traded. Imagine the government introduces certification requirements for all importers. Their costs would rise and the supply schedule would shift upwards. As a consequence, prices are higher and consumers buy less. Accordingly, trade decreases. Note that this is an outcome of the assumptions we made and how we drew the curves. We will see another example later. However, NTMs can also increase international trade by building consumer trust and confidence in the safety and quality of products. The following example illustrates this point. Imports of fresh meat and meat products into the European Union are subject to veterinary certification. Imports of meat or meat products must enter the EU via an approved border inspection post of the EU under the authority of an official veterinarian. Each consignment is subject to a systematic documentary check, identity check, and, as appropriate, a physical check. Consignments which are found not to be compliant with EU legislation shall either be destroyed or redispatched within 60 days. This regulation ensures that fresh meat and meat products entering the European Union can be consumed without concern. Thus, consumer confidence is reinforced by this import regulation. Again, we can depict the situation graphically. Based on our demand and supply schedules from before, we can analyze an introduction of a certification requirement. Note that now we will assume that the quality of the product is uncertain and consumers cannot identify it. As before, producers incur the costs of providing the certificate. The supply schedule shifts up. However, consumers are willing to pay a higher price for a certified product. The demand schedule shifts right. Even though prices increase, trade increases as well. The government regulation can in this case reduce the market failure, that is the uncertainty about the quality of the product. Complex regulations can be challenging for developing countries. Firstly, due to trade liberalization and significant tariff reductions, developing countries have lost competitiveness they have had through tariff preferences. NTMs that does not only gain in absolute importance due to their increased use, but also in relative importance with respect to tariffs. The same NTM imposed by an importing country can affect its trading partners differently. Exporting countries are heterogeneous, and some might find it harder to comply with, for example, technical standards than others. In general, compliance seems to be more difficult for exporters from developing countries. This can be due to, for example, the lack of laboratory or certification infrastructure. In the following video, Dr. Helen from the University of Michigan will talk about possible consequences of NTMs, especially for developing countries.
Well, they're certainly becoming relatively more severe because tariffs have come down, but I think probably, although it's hard to measure them and know for sure, but probably they're becoming more severe and the numbers of them are growing, and that developing countries have been, fortunately, able to try to begin exporting in ways that they didn't used to, so they're running into them in ways that they didn't used to do. But part of the growth is that the world economy, and especially the advanced countries, are increasingly using regulations for all sorts of valid purposes, health and security and so forth, environmental concerns, a whole long list of reasons. Those regulations, when they put them together, sometimes they simply ignore the difficulties that developing countries are going to have in satisfying those regulations. Sometimes they are aware of those difficulties, but they find it too difficult, or maybe they are being protectionist a little bit in not acknowledging those. So as the regulatory frameworks kind of proliferate in the developed world, that's almost necessarily going to mean increased non-tariff barriers for the developing world unless they are able to become part of that process of drafting the regulations.
ITC business surveys show that the majority of companies in developing countries find NTMs challenging. But how exactly can NTMs affect companies? We will see this with the help of two examples. Firstly, a company may find an NTM too strict to comply with. In this case, the challenge of the company is the restrictiveness of the NTM itself. Here an example from Sri Lanka.
When exporting cut flowers to India, we are required to complete an additional declaration in the phytosanitary certificate saying the flowers are free of Xanthomonas bacterial disease. In order to issue this certificate, lab technicians stationed at the airport have to inspect all plant nurseries that supply flowers to our company. We have to take them to all the local nurseries and bring them back to the capital. This strict requirement is both costly and time-consuming.
Alternatively, there may be practical challenges that make compliance with the NTM difficult. These challenges are called procedural obstacles and relate to the processes involved in complying with the NTM rather than the NTM itself being a problem. The following Moroccan exporter illustrates this point.
Moroccan exporters have to undergo costly and long testing that can take up to 21 days before they receive a certificate. In addition, tests carried out on almonds in Morocco are not recognized by the EU. Thus, upon import to the EU, products from Morocco are subject to additional testing.
ITC business surveys show that procedural obstacles can be the main source of difficulties for exporting firms from developing countries. When asked, 40% of companies in agriculture and 58% of companies in the manufacturing sector reported that procedural obstacles are the main source of difficulties with respect to NTMs. Procedural obstacles affect companies in many different ways. Firstly, there may be administrative burdens. These are difficulties in filling out documents, the need to submit too many documents, translation problems, or the need to deal with many administrative authorities. Second, there may be information or transparency issues. That means the company is not able to find adequate information on a given regulation, or it is confronted with frequent changes in regulations. Further, actual requirements might differ from the ones that are published. Additionally, inconsistent or discriminatory behavior of officials might be a problem for companies. Officials in charge may exhibit arbitrary behavior with regards to a given regulation, classification, or valuation of a product. Companies are often also subject to time constraints. This refers to delays businesses face with respect to fulfilling a regulation. Alternatively, deadlines set for completion of a requirement may be too short. Informal or unusual high payments are another reason a measure can be hard to comply with. This includes informal payments to officials or high costs of compliance. Another burden companies mentioned in the survey is the lack of sector-specific facilities. This includes testing laboratories or appropriate storage for products to reduce spoilage or damage. Finally, the lack of recognition or accreditation, as mentioned in the example before, can be a problem. Facilities available for testing products in the home country might lack international recognition. To sum up, NTMs are policy measures other than custom tariffs that can affect international trade in goods. They can reduce market failures and increase trade. However, if they are excessively strict, as we have seen for the Sri Lankan company, or if they are accompanied by procedural obstacles, as it was the case for the Moroccan exporter, they might be an obstacle to trade. Each country applies NTMs to exports as well as imports. Through this, they affect domestic as well as foreign companies. Accordingly, there are international, regional, and bilateral initiatives that enhance coordination with respect to NTMs. On the international level, there are two main agreements addressing the issue of NTMs in the framework of the World Trade Organization. First, there is the Technical Barriers to Trade Agreement, the TBT Agreement. The TBT Agreement encourages countries to use international standards, such that testing and certification procedures do not create unnecessary obstacles to trade. Second, there is the Agreement on the Application of Sanitary and Phytosanitary Measures, the SPS Agreement. The SPS agreement regulates each WTO member's policies relating to food safety as well as animal and plant health and their harmonization across countries. Additionally, countries can raise concerns to WTO committees or enforce their rights through the WTO dispute settlement when international rules are broken. Another solution to the increase in trade regulation are regional initiatives addressing the issue. The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, is an example. APEC member countries promote regional cooperation in green sectors through information exchange, enhanced transparency, and providing a baseline for the use of standards, technical regulation, and conformity assessment procedures. In the context of these initiatives, APEC members have recognized the need to conform to international standards, to promote mutual recognition of certification, and to increase stakeholder participation in the standard-setting process. An example for bilateral cooperation is the Memorandum of Understanding signed by Chinese and European authorities in 2006. It has been initiated as a reaction to toys of Chinese origin that had been identified as unsafe and therefore banned or withdrawn from the European market. Chinese authorities work towards preventing future bans on Chinese toys and inform the European Commission of the results of investigations conducted, including any measures adopted. ITC's work in the field of NTMs includes three main areas. Firstly, exporters and importers in developing countries often lack the information, capacity, and facilities needed in order to meet complex market requirements. In addition, policymakers are often unaware of what their business sector perceives as predominant obstacles to trade, which can make it difficult to develop trade-related policies. Moreover, ITC provides technical assistance in order to address NTM-related trade obstacles. This includes helping SMEs in developing countries to meet technical requirements in international markets, as well as ITC's trade facilitation program to increase the competitiveness of the private sector by building export capacity and reducing trade transaction costs. In the last part of this video, we will focus on ITC's information and transparency-related work. ITC attempts to fill this information gap through the collection of data of official government regulations as well as business surveys in developing countries. The collection of official NTM regulations involves a careful review and classification of legal documents issued by our government, such as laws, decrees, and directives. The collection of official NTM data is done jointly by ITC, UNCTAD, and the World Bank. ITC creates a central depository for all the collected data and disseminates this through Market Access Map. In addition to collecting official NTM regulations, ITC, together with its national partners, conducts large-scale surveys of exporting and importing companies about their experiences with burdensome regulations and procedures. These projects help policymakers in taking steps to reduce the burden of NTMs on companies. These steps include streamlining trade regulations, enhancing transparency, improving infrastructure, and building the capacity of institutions and companies in international trade. Let's sum up the main points of this video tutorial. NTMs are policy measures other than custom tariffs that can affect international trade in goods, such as import prohibitions or tolerance limits for certain substances. NTMs influence the volume and prices in international trade, as well as the costs and export decisions of companies, especially in developing countries. NTMs have gained in importance in international trade regulation. The application of NTMs is regulated by WTO agreements and subject to agreements on the bilateral and regional level. Some international organizations, such as ITC, the World Bank, and UNCTAD, have increased their efforts in collecting and disseminating data on NTMs to increase transparency in international trade. Thank you for watching this video tutorial. For more information, please visit our website or contact us.